My son and his wife decided my life was clutter. They held a yard sale and tossed my wedding ring, the symbol of my love story, into a 50-cent junk box. They thought they were selling off my past for pocket change. They had no idea that amongst the junk they so carelessly discarded was a forgotten treasure that would give me the power to become the new owner of their entire future. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My late husband, Richard, was a collector of stories. He believed every object had a past, a narrative whispered in its scuffs and scratches, its faded paint, its patient silence. Our home, a modest but solid bungalow on a quiet street, was his archive. He wasn't a man of great wealth, but he had an impeccable eye for things with character. A sturdy mid-century armchair found on the curb, a folk art sculpture from a dusty roadside stall, a collection of pottery from an artist no one had ever heard of. He'd bring these treasures home, a triumphant gleam in his eye, and I'd find the perfect spot for them. Our house became a tapestry of our shared life, woven from threads of love, history, and quiet appreciation. After Richard passed 2 years ago, that tapestry became my comfort. At 73, I lived a quiet life on my fixed income, surrounded by the ghosts of our happy memories. Each object was a connection to him. But to my son Dorian and his impeccably stylish wife Brooke, my home was not a sanctuary. It was a problem. A cluttered, outdated, low-yield problem. Dorian, my son of 46, had inherited his father's charm but none of his depth. His wife, Brooke, a woman of 44 whose personality seemed to be curated from glossy lifestyle magazines, had a particular allergy to anything she considered old. To them, my home was not a collection of stories, but an inventory of junk, an untapped source of cash that was, in their minds, being criminally underutilized. Their visits had become a campaign of attrition. "Mother Sterling," Brooke would begin, her voice a symphony of feigned concern as she'd run a finger along a dusty, forgotten corner. "This house is simply overflowing. You can't possibly enjoy living in such clutter. It isn't healthy." Dorian would nod in agreement, his eyes scanning the room. "She's right, Mom. You need to downsize. Monetize some of these assets. Think of the freedom you'd have." The freedom they'd have, he meant, with a portion of the proceeds. Their own lives were a testament to living beyond their means. The flashy car, the expensive vacations, the constant complaints about being cash poor. The pressure culminated in their brilliant idea. A yard sale. "We'll do all the work, Mom," Dorian had promised. "We'll clear out the attic, the basement. You won't have to lift a finger. It'll be a fun family project and you'll end up with a tidy little nest egg." My heart sank. A yard sale felt like a violation, a public auction of my private history. But their combined insistence, their relentless talk of my safety and well-being, wore me down. I finally, wearily, agreed on the condition that they not touch anything in the main living areas or my bedroom. That was my mistake. I had underestimated their ruthlessness. The weekend before the sale, they descended on my house like a conquering army. They weren't clearing clutter. They were conducting a purge. I'd hear them in the attic, their laughter sharp as they'd call out, "Can you believe she kept this old thing?" They filled box after box with items I hadn't seen in years, but whose stories I still knew by heart. Old board games, stacks of Richard's favorite records, a box of my own university textbooks. I tried to intervene to rescue a cherished memory from a cardboard box marked Misc. Junk 50 cents, but they'd wave me away. "Now, Mom, don't be sentimental," Dorian would say. "The goal here is to be ruthless. If you haven't used it in a year, it goes." The worst came on Friday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, my hands trembling with a mixture of anger and helplessness, when Brooke emerged from my bedroom, a place I had forbidden them from entering. She was holding my small velvet-lined jewelry box. "Found this tucked away in your closet, darling," she chirped, dumping its contents onto the kitchen table. It wasn't much. A few silver brooches, my mother's locket, and nestled in its own compartment my wedding ring. A simple thin gold band. Its monetary value was negligible, but its sentimental worth was immeasurable. Brooke picked it up, holding it between her perfectly manicured thumb and forefinger as if it were a curious insect. "Oh, look at this," she said to Dorian, who had just walked in. "So thin. So plain. Who would even want this old thing? Without another thought, she tossed it into a small cardboard box filled with mismatched earrings and tarnished costume jewelry. A box she'd labeled, "Junk Jewelry 50 cents each." I froze. The casual, thoughtless cruelty of it stole my breath. My son Dorian saw the look on my face. He saw the tears welling in my eyes. And he did nothing. He just shrugged, a small, apologetic grimace on his face as if to say, "What can you do? That's Brooke." But it wasn't just Brooke. It was him too. His silence, his complicity, his utter failure to defend my dignity, his own father's memory. In that moment something inside me broke. The soft, accommodating mother they knew, the one who could be worn down by their insistent campaign, vanished. In her place, a cold, quiet, and deeply furious stranger began to emerge. That night, after they had left, their car filled with price stickers and folding tables, I walked through my violated house. The attic was bare, the basement echoed. They had taken so much. But in their ignorant, greedy haste, they had overlooked things. Things whose stories they didn't know, whose value they couldn't possibly comprehend. In the corner of the attic, they had left behind a strange, clunky-looking armchair Richard had dragged home years ago, its upholstery a garish, faded orange. An original by a Danish designer, he had told me, worth a fortune one day. They had also left the heavy, ugly pottery vases from an artist Richard had admired. A woman who was then unknown but whose work I had read recently was being rediscovered by collectors. They had thrown my wedding ring, a symbol of my life's greatest love, into a 50-cent box. But they had left behind the very things that would fund my revenge. They saw me as a relic, my home as a gold mine to be plundered for quick, easy cash. They had no idea about the true nature of the treasure they had so foolishly discarded. And they had no idea that this sentimental old woman was about to teach them a lesson in value that would cost them everything. The morning of the yard sale was a study in gray, the sky a flat, unforgiving sheet of pewter that matched the mood in my soul. My quiet residential street, usually a peaceful haven, was transformed. Cars lined the curbs and strangers, their faces eager with the promise of a bargain, picked through the fragments of my life spread out on my lawn like so much flotsam after a shipwreck. Dorian and Brooke were in their element, playing the roles of cheerful, savvy hosts. Brooke, in a stylish jumpsuit that probably cost more than everything in the 50-cents box combined, haggled with customers, her voice sharp and dismissive. Dorian, a forced smile plastered on his face, directed people towards the good stuff, which seemed to be anything old enough to be considered vintage but not so old as to be, in their eyes, just junk. I stayed inside for most of the morning, watching from my living room window, a silent, unwilling observer of my own public dismantling. I saw a young woman excitedly purchase a stack of my late husband's beloved jazz records for $1 apiece. I watched a man gleefully haul away the old rocking chair where I had nursed both my children, paying a pittance for a piece of my heart. Each transaction was a small, sharp pain. But my focus was on one thing, the small cardboard box labeled junk jewelry. It sat on a card table near the driveway, a pathetic collection of tangled chains and tarnished metal. And inside I knew was my wedding ring. Around 10 o'clock my oldest and dearest friend Cynthia Fields arrived. At 72, Cynthia was a whirlwind of sharp intelligence and fierce loyalty, her eyes missing nothing. She took one look at the chaotic scene on my lawn, then at my face through the window, and her expression hardened. She came straight to the door. "Iris," she said, her voice a low, furious murmur as she stepped inside. "This is a disgrace. A public desecration. How could you let them do this?" "I didn't have much of a choice, Cynthia," I replied, my voice weary. "But they have made a few critical errors in their assessment of my junk." I told her then about the ugly orange armchair tucked away by the garage, and the heavy pottery vases they'd used to prop open a gate. I told her about my theory, my research, my dawning realization of their potential incredible value. And then, my voice cracking, I told her about my wedding ring sitting in that 50-cent box. Cynthia's eyes blazed. "That worthless gold-digging witch," she hissed, referring to Brooke. "And Dorian letting her. Oh, Iris, we have to get that ring." "I can't, Cynthia," I said. "If I go out there and ask for it, they'll know. They'll either mock me for being sentimental or, worse, get suspicious about what else they might have mispriced." I paused, then looked her directly in the eye. "But you could." A slow, wolfish grin spread across Cynthia's face. "Oh yes," she said. "I most certainly could." We formulated a plan. She would be the bargain hunter, the slightly dotty old friend looking for a trinket. She would buy my wedding ring back for me. And while she was at it, she would purchase the ugly orange armchair and the 2 clunky pottery vases. She would act dismissive, haggling over the price to complete the performance. Cynthia was a brilliant actress. She wandered out into the yard, her handbag clutched, affecting a slightly stooped, searching posture. I watched from the window as she browsed, picking up a chipped saucer here, a tarnished silver spoon there. She eventually made her way to the junk jewelry box. My heart pounded. She rummaged through it for a long time, then held up a gaudy rhinestone brooch. "How much for this little number, dear?" she asked Brooke, her voice a quavering soprano. Brooke, barely looking up from her phone, said, 50 cents. Everything in the box is 50 cents. "Oh, wonderful," Cynthia chirped. She picked out the brooch and then, almost as an afterthought, her fingers closed around my thin, simple gold band. "And this old thing too," she said, dropping them both into her palm. Then she moved on to the bigger items. She pointed at the ugly vases. "My, those are hefty. $5 for the pair." "They're holding the gate open, but sure, take 'em," Dorian called out, laughing with a customer. "Then the armchair. And that dreadful orange chair?" Cynthia asked, poking it with her toe. "My son needs something for his garage. I'll give you $20 for it, but you'll have to help me get it into my car." "Sold," Brooke said with a roll of her eyes, clearly thrilled to be rid of it. Dorian and a reluctant neighbor helped Cynthia wrestle the heavy chair into the back of her station wagon. I heard Dorian laugh as they drove away. "Can you believe it?" he said to Brooke. "That old bat paid $25 for that pile of junk. Some people have no taste." Brooke smirked. "At least it's gone. More space for the for sale sign soon." They had no idea. They had no idea that my wedding ring was now safe in my best friend's pocket. They had no idea that the ugly vases were rare, early works by a now famous ceramicist, likely worth tens of thousands of dollars. And they had no idea that the dreadful orange armchair was a highly sought-after mid-century modern classic, designed by a famous Danish architect, its estimated auction value well into 6 figures. They had, in their arrogant, greedy haste, not only humiliated me by discarding my most precious memory, they had literally handed me the financial means to orchestrate their downfall. The yard sale was their idea, their project. But the real profit, the real nest egg, was now mine. And I knew with a certainty that was as cold and as hard as a diamond, exactly how I was going to spend it. The day after the yard sale, my house felt violated, hollowed out. The chaotic energy was gone, but so were pieces of my life sold off for pocket change. Dorian and Brooke had come by in the morning, triumphant, and handed me a crumpled wad of cash. $375, Mom, Dorian had announced proudly. Not bad for a bunch of old junk, right? They had kept a portion for their efforts, of course. I took the money without a word, my face a carefully blank mask. My silence they took for defeat. My composure for resignation. They had no idea. As soon as they left, Cynthia arrived. She didn't come in empty-handed. In one hand she carried a small velvet pouch. In the other she held a look of righteous, conspiratorial glee. "Well," she said, setting the pouch gently on my kitchen table, "Operation Trojan Horse was a complete success." I opened the pouch and there it was. My thin gold wedding band. I slipped it onto my finger, the familiar weight a profound, almost painful comfort. It was home. "Thank you, Cynthia," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you what this means." "Oh, hush," she said, waving a hand. "That was the easy part. Now for the fun part." She rubbed her hands together. "Where did those ruffians put the rest of our loot?" Together we went to her station wagon. The 2 heavy, ugly pottery vases were wrapped carefully in blankets in the back. And the dreadful orange armchair, its garish color seeming to glow with a secret power, was wedged in beside them. We wrestled them out of the car and into my living room, 2 old women grunting with the effort, giggling like schoolgirls. The next step in my plan required expertise. I had my suspicions, my hopes, based on years of accompanying Richard on his treasure hunts through dusty antique shops and listening to him discourse on art and design. But I needed confirmation. My first call was to a man named Mr. Alistair Finch, a discreet, highly respected appraiser of fine arts and antiques downtown. I'd known of him for years through Richard. I explained that I had recently come into possession of a few items of interest and would like a private appraisal. The following Tuesday, Mr. Finch, a dapper man with a magnifying glass on a chain around his neck, arrived at my home. I showed him the pottery first. He ran his hands over the rough, earthy texture, turned them over to examine the faint, almost invisible potter's mark on the bottom. He squinted at it through his magnifying glass, then let out a low whistle. "My dear Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice hushed with reverence, "do you know what you have here? These are early works by Maria Martinez, the legendary Pueblo potter. Before she became famous. They are exceptionally rare. And I might add exceptionally valuable." He quoted a 5-figure sum for the pair that made my head spin. Then I led him to the armchair. He circled it like a lion stalking its prey, his eyes taking in its strange organic curves, the worn but still beautiful teak wood of its frame. He lifted a cushion, examined the joinery, looked for a maker's mark. "It's unmarked," he murmured, "but the design is unmistakable. The chieftain chair. Designed by Finn Jewell in 1949. An icon of Danish modernism. If this is an original from that period, and I strongly suspect it is, well." He paused, polishing his glasses. "The last one I saw at a major auction house sold for over $150,000. I sank into my own less valuable armchair, my hand fluttering to my chest. $150,000. For the dreadful orange chair Dorian and Brooke had sold for $20 to get it out of their sight. The full, staggering scope of my newfound fortune settled over me. It was more money than I had ever seen, more than I had ever dreamed of. It was freedom. It was security. And it was, most deliciously, power. The power to enact the plan that was now taking shape in my mind with a cold, perfect clarity. Mr. Finch arranged everything. The vases and the chair were carefully transported from my home to a secure location, then consigned to a prestigious auction house in the city, one that specialized in fine art and design. The auction was to be held in 6 weeks. The proceeds would be transferred directly into a new trust account set up by a lawyer Mr. Finch had recommended, a sharp, sensible woman who understood the need for absolute discretion. My life, which had felt so small, so circumscribed by my modest pension and my children's casual cruelty, had suddenly, miraculously, expanded. I thought of Dorian and Brooke, so proud of the few $100s they had made from selling off my life, so dismissive of the real treasure that had been sitting right under their noses. Their ignorance was my windfall. Their greed was my liberation. I looked up Dorian's mortgage online. It was a matter of public record if you knew where to look. I saw the name of the bank, the original loan amount, the terms. He and Brooke were living in a stylish new development, their lives a testament to debt and the desperate need to project an image of wealth they didn't truly possess. They were, I realized, incredibly vulnerable. A slow, cold smile, the kind I hadn't felt in years, touched my lips. My revenge would not be a fiery confrontation or a tearful accusation. That was not my style. My revenge would be quiet, methodical, legal. It would be a business transaction. They had treated my home, my life, like a commodity to be bought and sold. Very well. Two could play at that game. And I, Iris Sterling, the sentimental old woman with no taste, was about to become the new owner of their debt. I was about to buy their mortgage. And then the real fun would begin. The 6 weeks leading up to the auction were a masterclass in quiet deception. To Dorian and Brooke, I was the same old Iris, a little more withdrawn perhaps, a little sadder after the stress of the yard sale, as they condescendingly termed it. They'd visit occasionally, their conversations still revolving around their own financial woes, their plans for a kitchen renovation they couldn't afford, blissfully unaware that I was about to become one of the wealthiest women in our quiet, suburban town. They'd offer me advice, their words laced with a pity that was almost comical. "You should really think about downsizing, Mom," Dorian would say, looking around my now slightly barer living room. "See how much nicer it is with less clutter. A small condo would be so much more manageable for you." Little did he know, I was about to become the owner of his own over-leveraged mortgage to the Hilt house. While they planned their renovations, I planned my acquisition. My days were filled with discreet phone calls and quiet meetings. I met with Eleanor James, the brilliant financial lawyer Mr. Finch had recommended. She was a woman of my own age, with sharp, intelligent eyes that held no pity, only a shrewd understanding of strategy and a clear appreciation for the irony of my situation. "So, let me get this straight, Iris," she'd said at our first meeting, a slow, admiring smile spreading across her face. "Your son and daughter-in-law, in their infinite wisdom, sold off what they thought was junk from your attic, including a Finn Jewel chieftain chair and 2 Maria Martinez pots for pocket change. And you, knowing their true value, had a friend purchase them on your behalf." "That is the sum of it, Eleanor," I confirmed. "And now," she continued, leaning back in her chair, "you want to use the proceeds from the auction of these items to purchase the mortgage note on their own home from their bank." "I want to become their lender," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I want them to be in my debt, literally." Eleanor's smile widened. "Iris," she said, "this is the most beautifully executed, poetically just and legally sound revenge I have heard of in my 30 years of practice. It will be my absolute pleasure to facilitate this." She explained the process. It was complex but not impossible. Financial institutions often sell mortgage notes to other banks or investment entities. For a private individual with significant liquid capital to make an offer to purchase a specific, performing loan was unusual, but entirely legal. It would require a substantial premium, of course. The bank wouldn't sell the debt at a loss. But with the pre-auction estimates from the auction house, I knew I would have more than enough. While Eleanor's team began the discreet preliminary inquiries with the bank, I focused on the auction. It was held online, a high-end affair that attracted collectors from all over the world. I watched from the comfort of my own living room, my heart pounding as I saw the items from my life, from Richard's life, displayed in beautifully lit photographs. The Maria Martinez pottery went first, the bidding fierce, selling for a price that made me gasp. But it was the chair, my dreadful orange chair, that was the star of the show. The bidding started high and climbed relentlessly. I watched the numbers ascend, each new bid a fresh indictment of my children's ignorance, a testament to Richard's quiet, unerring eye. The final gavel price was staggering, even more than Mr. Finch had predicted. The total proceeds from the auction were transferred to my new trust account a few days later. The sum was life-altering. It was security, it was freedom, it was power. And it was all thanks to Dorian and Brooke's arrogant, greedy haste. With the funds secured, Eleanor James moved swiftly. Her team made a formal all-cash offer to Dorian's bank to purchase the mortgage note for his property. The offer was significantly above the outstanding principal, making it an attractive, low-risk proposition for the bank. It took a few weeks of negotiation, of legal paperwork being shuttled back and forth between corporate entities and my newly formed trust, but finally it was done. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor called me. "Congratulations, Iris," she said, her voice full of satisfaction. "As of this morning, the transfer is complete. You are now the official owner of the debt and lien on your son's home. You are the bank." I held the phone, a strange, dizzying sense of power washing over me. For years, I had been the one they looked to for small loans, for help, the one they saw as financially fragile. Now I held their single biggest financial obligation, their very home, in the palm of my hand. The beauty of the transaction was its silence. Dorian and Brooke would have no idea anything had changed, not at first. They would continue to make their monthly mortgage payments, but now, those payments would be electronically routed not to a faceless bank but to my trust. They would be, in effect, paying rent to me, their sentimental old woman with no taste. But I had no intention of letting them continue in blissful ignorance for long. My revenge was not just about holding the power. It was about them knowing I held it. It was about them understanding, with a chilling, dawning horror, the full scope of their catastrophic miscalculation. I looked at the calendar. Their next mortgage payment was due in 10 days. And I, their new, unforgiving lender, had already reviewed the original loan agreement. I knew, down to the last clause, the penalties for being even 1 day late. The interest rates were draconian. The grace period non-existent. The old bank, a large corporation, might have been lenient. But I was not a large corporation. I was a mother who had been deeply, unforgivably wronged. And my patience had run out. For 10 days I lived with the secret, a quiet, humming power source in the center of my being. Dorian and Brooke continued their lives in blissful ignorance, their world unchanged. Dorian called once, his voice full of the usual weary impatience, to ask if I'd downsized my clutter any further. I'd simply replied, "I'm managing my assets quite effectively now, dear. a statement of such profound, multi-layered truth that I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. Their mortgage payment was due on the first of the month. As their new silent lender, my trust received the electronic transfer on time. They had no idea they were paying me. The first part of my plan was simply to let the new reality settle, to become the invisible, inexorable force that now controlled their financial destiny. The true lesson would begin with their first mistake. I didn't have to wait long. Dorian and Brooke, for all their pretensions of wealth and status, were financially chaotic. Their lives were a scramble of keeping up appearances, of leveraging one debt to pay for another. About 3 months after I had purchased their mortgage, the inevitable happened. The payment due on the first hadn't arrived by the second. The old bank, a vast, impersonal entity, likely would have sent a polite, automated reminder after a week or two, their systems allowing for a grace period. But I was not an impersonal entity, and I was not feeling gracious. I immediately called my lawyer, Eleanor James. "They're late," I said, my voice calm. "1 day late." "Excellent," she replied, her own voice full of professional satisfaction. "I have the notice drafted and ready to go as per your instructions." The notice was not a polite reminder. It was a cold legal document, citing the precise clause in their mortgage agreement that detailed the penalties for late payment. There was no grace period. The late fee was substantial, and more importantly, a higher, punitive interest rate was now in effect, a rate that would continue to accrue daily until the full payment was received. Eleanor sent the notice via a certified courier, ensuring it would be signed for, its receipt undeniable. I imagined the scene at their stylish, over-leveraged home. The sharp ring of the doorbell, Brooke, perhaps in one of her expensive yoga outfits, answering with an annoyed expression, expecting another designer delivery. And then the courier handing her the stark legal envelope. The phone call from Dorian came less than an hour later. He was sputtering, apoplectic with a rage born of confusion and fear. "Mom, what is this? We just got some crazy legal letter. It says our mortgage payment is late and that the interest rate has gone up. It's from some holding trust? The RH Legacy Trust? What the hell is going on? Did you do something?" I let the silence hang for a moment, savoring his panic. Dorian," I said softly, my voice as cool and smooth as a river stone. "As in Richard Holloway. My late husband. Your father. The man whose memory you valued at 50 cents for my wedding ring." Another silence, longer this time, more profound. I could almost hear the frantic whirring of his mind as he tried to piece it together. What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice suddenly smaller, weaker. "I'm talking about due diligence, Dorian," I continued, my voice even. "Something you and Brooke have never been very good at. You see, when you so generously cleared out my junk, you overlooked a few items. An old armchair. A couple of ugly vases. It turns out the art and antiques market disagreed with your assessment of their value. Quite strongly, in fact." I paused, letting him absorb the implication. "And I, in my sentimental old age, decided to invest the proceeds. I invested in debt. Specifically," I added, delivering the final devastating blow, "your debt. I own your mortgage now, son. The RH Legacy Trust and its sole trustee, me, is your new lender. And you are 1 day late." I had never heard such a sound from him before. It was a strangled gasp, a mixture of disbelief, horror, and the dawning, sickening understanding of the trap he had walked into. You can't be serious," he whispered. "I am perfectly serious," I replied. "And as your new lender, I must inform you that according to the terms of the agreement you signed, the punitive interest rate is now in effect, and a late fee of $100 has been applied to your account. And another $100 will be applied for every day the payment remains outstanding." $100 a day?" he shrieked. That's extortion." "No, Dorian," I said, my voice as cold and as hard as a diamond. "That's the contract. A contract you should have read more carefully. Just as you should have looked more carefully at the junk you were so eager to throw away." He began to bluster, then to threaten, to call me names. But the words had lost their power. He wasn't my son berating his mother anymore. He was a desperate debtor pleading with his creditor. And his creditor was feeling entirely unmoved. "The payment is late, Dorian," I said, cutting him off. "And the penalties are accruing. Daily. I suggest you and Brooke find a way to pay it. Promptly. I hung up the phone, my hands steady. I walked to my window and looked out at the city. The first notice had been delivered. My quiet, slow, and inescapable revenge had begun. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the daily reminder. The daily mounting pressure. Every morning they woke up, they would know they owed me more than the day before. Every day they would be forced to remember the wedding ring in the 50-cent box, the armchair they'd laughed at, the mother they had so carelessly, so arrogantly dismissed. My revenge wasn't a quick, fiery explosion. It was a slow, grinding financial erosion, a lesson delivered $1 one day at a time. The late fees, my $1 a day as I had come to think of them, were just the beginning. The real power, as my lawyer Eleanor James had so gleefully explained, was in the relentless by-the-book enforcement of every clause in their mortgage agreement. The old, faceless bank had likely been lenient, their automated systems allowing for grace periods, their customer service agents offering payment plans. I, on the other hand, offered no such courtesies. I was the bank now, and my customer service department was permanently closed. Dorian and Brooke scrambled to make the late payment, but the penalty fees had already started their relentless march. Their next payment was on time to the penny. The one after that was 2 days late. Another notice. More fees. Their carefully constructed lifestyle, built on a foundation of credit and over-leveraged assets, began to show cracks under the new, unyielding pressure. They tried everything. Dorian called me, his voice a pathetic mix of false joviality and pleading. "Come on, Mom, can't you cut us some slack? Just this once." "I'm afraid the trust has a very strict policy on late payments, Dorian," I would reply, my voice cool and professional. "You should refer to the terms of your agreement." Brooke, in a move of stunning audacity, tried to appeal to my better nature. She showed up at my door unannounced, a cheap bouquet of carnations in her hand, her face a mask of practiced sincerity. She spoke of family, of forgiveness, of the stress they were under. "Brooke," I said, looking her dead in the eye, "the time for you to consider the value of family was when you were tossing my wedding ring into a 50-cent box. The time to consider stress was before you and my son decided to humiliate me at a public yard sale. My better nature is now fully occupied with ensuring that contractual obligations are met. Please don't call on me again without an appointment." I closed the door gently in her stunned face. The pressure mounted. The daily late fees became a weekly source of panic for them. Their frantic shuffling of funds from one credit card to another became a desperate, losing battle. They were forced to sell Brooke's expensive, leased car. They canceled their lavish vacation plans. The whispers in our old neighborhood started. The satisfying schadenfreude of people who had witnessed their arrogance now witnessing their downfall. Their financial house of cards, already so precarious, began to collapse. About 6 months after my quiet acquisition of their debt, they missed a full mortgage payment. Then another. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the checkmate. Eleanor James, on behalf of the RH Legacy Trust, sent the final devastating letter. It was a formal notice of default, informing them that as they had breached the terms of their loan agreement, the trust was accelerating their debt. The full remaining balance of the mortgage was now due immediately, and if it was not paid within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. Their panic turned to raw, primal terror. They knew they couldn't possibly produce that kind of money. They would lose their home. Dorian called me one last time, not with anger or threats, but with the broken, sobbing desperation of a man who had lost everything. He begged. He pleaded. He apologized, his words finally perhaps holding a shred of genuine remorse, born not of a change of heart, but of absolute devastating defeat. He offered to do anything, to work for me, to pay me back over a lifetime if I would just stop the foreclosure. I listened to him, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of the old maternal pity. But it was quickly extinguished by the cold, hard memory of my wedding ring in that cardboard box. "It was never about the money, Dorian," I said softly, my voice holding not triumph but a profound, weary sadness. "It was about value. You and Brooke, you know the price of everything but the value of nothing. You devalued my love, my history, your own father's memory. You thought my most cherished possessions were junk, and you treated me accordingly." I paused, letting the truth of my words sink in. "This isn't revenge, not in the way you think. This is a lesson. A final, expensive lesson in value. I am not foreclosing on your home, son. A A small, hopeful gasp came down the line. I am, however, I continued, my voice now as firm and as unyielding as a banker's, offering the trust's terms for a new arrangement. I will refinance your debt under my own terms. The interest rate will be fair, but the penalties for late payment will remain. And, I added, delivering the final, inescapable condition, you will both attend financial counseling. And you, Dorian, will volunteer every Saturday for the next year at the local historical society, dusting and cataloging the old junk of other people's lives, so you might finally learn to appreciate the value of a story. Those are my terms. Take them or I will see you at the foreclosure auction. He took them. Of course he took them. I didn't take their house. I took something far more valuable, their arrogance. I became the silent, ever-present force that dictated their financial reality, the daily reminder of their profound mistake. They would spend years paying off their debt to me, their lives now circumscribed by a frugality they had always disdained. My own life, funded by the junk they had so carelessly discarded, blossomed. I bought a small, beautiful condominium in the city, filled with light and art that I loved. I established a small grant in Richard's name at the local museum to support young artists. I found my peace. My revenge was not in their ruin, but in my own quiet, dignified triumph. It was in the knowledge that every month when they made their mortgage payment to the RH Legacy Trust, they were paying tribute not just to their debt, but to the memory of the good man they had so disrespected, and to the sentimental old woman who had taught them the difference between price and value.